The storm above Earth's orbit wasn't natural. It was a swirl of violet lightning and green flame that tore through the clouds of space like a living beast. Ships fell. Satellites blinked out. And then a hole opened near Mars where nothing should have existed. The artifact appeared inside that hole. It was shaped like a sphere, spinning with rings of light that pulsed like a heart. Every sensor screamed, but no one could stop it. It shot toward Earth like a bullet made of fire and vanished over the Pacific. For 3 days, Earth lost power in strange waves. In the oceans, whales screamed and birds fled from unseen winds. People saw lights in their dreams and voices whispering in languages no one had ever heard. Governments tried to hide it, but the world was already changing. On the 4th night, the artifact was found. Not by soldiers, not by scientists, but by a young man named Kael, who had been fishing near a quiet island where he often camped alone. The sky split open above him, and the sphere fell gently into his boat. Kael should have run. He should have thrown it back into the sea. But something inside the object called to him. It glowed with gold and azure patterns, and when he touched it, the artifact pulsed and sank into his skin like liquid light. He collapsed, not from pain but from visions. In the darkness of his mind, Kael saw towers of silver on alien worlds. He saw great beasts walking beside humanoid figures. He saw wars that shattered moons. And then he saw her, a woman with glowing blue hair, tall horns, and violet skin. She stood before a crowd of armored aliens, her voice like thunder. But when she looked at Kael, her expression softened. She reached for him, and everything went white. When he woke, the world was no longer the same. His body felt lighter, stronger, and something pulsed on his chest. The artifact had formed a pattern on his skin, a glowing symbol that matched the alien writing he saw in his vision. The sky outside was calm, too calm. As Kael stepped off the boat, the waves stopped completely. The clouds above froze in place. And in that strange silence, something shimmered before him. It was not a human figure that emerged. It was her. The alien woman from his vision appeared, dressed in ceremonial armor that shimmered like moonlight. Her eyes locked onto his chest, onto the symbol. Then she knelt before him and spoke words that bent the air around them. He didn't understand the words, but he felt them. A bond had been made. A selection had been fulfilled. She had not come to hurt him. She had come because the artifact had chosen him. And with it, her fate had been sealed. Before Kael could speak, a bright flash struck the ocean near the shore. A second figure appeared, taller, armored, and not friendly. The female alien pulled Kael behind her and raised her hand. A shield of light formed instantly as the other alien charged. Kael watched as energy bolts bounced off her shield. She didn't fight back with weapons. Instead, she extended her hand, and the ground shook beneath the enemy. The artifact on Kael's chest pulsed again, and without thinking, he stepped forward. As soon as he moved, the enemy froze. Its weapons dimmed. The sky returned to motion. Kael's presence had changed the field itself. The artifact was not a tool, it was a key. And now every creature who knew its power would come looking for him. The female alien turned back to him and spoke again. This time, the words translated inside his head. She said her name was Arinthia. And by the laws of her people, the one chosen by the artifact became not only its bearer, but also her bonded mate. Kael stood frozen, trying to understand what that meant. War, destiny, marriage, it all spun in his head. But even as he struggled, Arinthia smiled and reached out her hand. The choice had already been made by forces far older than either of them. Kael didn't know if he was lucky or cursed. But as he took her hand and the sky shimmered again, he knew one thing for sure. The world would never go back to what it was. Kael stood in a glowing circle of light as the beach vanished around him. Wind whipped past his face, yet he felt no cold, The light carried him higher, like an elevator made of stars. He tried to speak, but the energy pulsing around his body silenced him. When the light faded, Kael found himself inside a massive chamber made of crystal and metal. The walls moved like they were alive. Symbols lit up as he stepped forward. Strange music echoed from places he couldn't see. The air smelled like lightning and flowers. Beside him stood Orinthia. Her expression was calm but serious. She no longer wore armor, but now had a long flowing robe with silver edges and delicate patterns that shimmered in the light. She looked at him and spoke a word that translated inside his mind. Chosen. The sound rang like a bell in his skull. It wasn't just a title, it was a command. The artifact on Kael's chest glowed in response. A wave of heat pulsed through his veins. Orinthia nodded and guided him deeper into the glowing hall. The path led to a throne-shaped stone surrounded by glowing towers. Creatures of many kinds stood watching, tall beings with feathered heads, metal-bodied soldiers, and strange floating orbs with blinking eyes. All eyes were fixed on Kael. Orinthia raised her voice and spoke in her native language. Her words echoed with power. Kael's ears heard nothing human, but his mind translated the message. He is chosen. The artifact has bound him. He will now walk among us as bonded and bearer. Kael felt heat rise in his chest as every being in the chamber bowed their heads. It wasn't respect he felt, it was fear. These creatures didn't know him. They didn't care that he was human. They only cared about what the artifact had decided. A blast of wind surged through the chamber as a new figure stepped forward. Unlike the others, this one wore no armor or robe. It was tall, thin, and had glowing rings circling its head. Its voice sounded sharp, like a blade scraping metal. This human is unproven, it said. He must be tested. If he fails, bond is broken, and the bride returns to her kind. Orinthia's face changed. Her lips tightened, and her hand moved protectively near Kael. The test was not just a ceremony. It was survival. Kael had no idea what they meant by a test. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't trained for this. He had just been a guy with a fishing rod and a quiet life. But the artifact had not chosen him for his past. It had chosen him for something else. Without warning, the floor dropped beneath them. Kael fell into darkness with Orinthia by his side. She didn't scream. Her eyes glowed with calm fire. She reached for his hand as they landed softly in a forest made of glass and smoke. Trees shimmered with energy. Strange birds flew silently through the air. The ground pulsed beneath his feet. This is the trial field, Orinthia said. It will test your soul, not your strength. You must survive it with me, or we both are undone. Shapes moved between the trees. Whispers echoed in the air. Kael felt the forest pulling at his thoughts, dragging out his worst fears. He saw shadows of people from his past, his father yelling, his friends turning away. The pain of being ordinary. Orinthia squeezed his hand and her voice broke through the noise. You are not alone, she said. The artifact does not choose weakness. It chooses hearts that can carry weight. Kael took a deep breath and walked forward. The shadows hissed but did not stop him. Orinthia stayed close. With every step, the path grew clearer. The light from his chest pushed the darkness away. The trees began to shimmer blue instead of red. At the center of the forest stood a pool of light. Inside it, reflections danced images of a life he had not yet lived. A throne beside Orinthia. Stars bowing before their names. Enemies defeated not by war, but by unity. It wasn't prophecy. It was potential. The moment Kael touched the water, the world shifted again. The forest vanished. He stood once more inside the Hall of Towers. The being with the ring circled his head, stepped back in silence. Then it bowed slightly and said, "Accepted." Orinthia smiled, the first real smile Kael had seen from her. And when she took his hand again, it no longer felt like fate had thrown them together. It felt like they were walking into something they were meant to face together. Kael stood still as the council members watched in silence. The chamber was heavy with tension. Strange lights circled overhead. Arinthia kept her hand on his, firm and calm. He didn't speak, but his heartbeat was loud in his ears. The council leader raised one arm. Thin rings of energy swirled around his fingers. The artifact has awakened fully, he said. This has not happened in 3,000 cycles. The last bearer failed. If this one fails, the galaxy may fracture. Kael didn't understand why so much rested on him. He had no training. He had no experience, but he knew the visions he saw were real. He had felt the pain of worlds. He had seen battles across suns. Something inside the artifact had trusted him. Another counselor stepped forward. Her voice was softer but firmer. You carry ancient will. You are now part of the line of balance. Your thoughts, your choices, your fears, all will echo beyond your life. You must learn the truth of what you bear. The chamber changed. Walls turned to mist. Stars appeared around them like floating lanterns. A new space unfolded, showing history not in books but in living scenes. Kael watched cities rise and fall. Wars ignite and end. Peace form and shatter. He saw the first bearer, a creature made of crystal and fire. That being had used the artifact to bring order between 9 species, but he had grown proud. When he tried to use the artifact alone, it rejected him. He burned to ash in his palace. Then another bearer came. She had led her people through famine and war. Her bond with her chosen was strong. But when he was killed, she turned to vengeance. The artifact turned dim. Her empire collapsed under her sorrow. Kael realized the artifact didn't just grant power. It demanded balance. It gave hope but also tested the soul. It worked only when 2 hearts held the bond together. Alone, it was just a burden. Together, it became a path forward. Arinthia turned to him. Her voice was steady. Now you see. The artifact chose you not for strength, but for heart. You were alone by choice. You healed in silence. That is why it trusted you, and now we are one with it. Kael's chest burned softly. The symbol on his skin lit brighter than ever. A beam of light shot from the chamber roof, striking him directly. He felt weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't rise into the air, but it felt like his soul did. When the light faded, he heard the council speak in unison. Bearer confirmed. Bond sealed. The bride is recognized. Let the path of joining begin. Kael didn't fully know what that meant, but he saw pride in Arinthia's eyes. The next day, Kael was led through the halls of the Crystal Spire. Beings bowed as he passed. Not because of who he was, but because of what he now carried. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was a part of their fate. They entered a chamber filled with light and moving screens. A female figure greeted them. She wore silver robes and held a long crystal rod. I am the Lorekeeper. I will teach you what the books cannot. You must learn the warnings of the bond. Kael nodded. He was ready to learn. The Lorekeeper touched his chest gently, and waves of memory poured into his thoughts. He saw fields of light, black holes whispering secrets, and battles fought with only words. The galaxy was much older than he knew. Behind him, Arinthia placed her hand on his shoulder. She had known this world all her life, but now she looked to him with trust. Not as someone who was forced to stand beside her, but as someone she had chosen to walk with. The lesson ended as the sun set beyond the spire. Kael looked out across the world of Arinthia's people. Floating cities glided above green oceans. Beasts soared beside ships. He wondered if Earth would ever believe what he had become. Night fell, and with it came the silence of thought. Kael sat alone, feeling the pulse of the artifact on his skin. He wasn't afraid anymore. The burden was still heavy, but now he knew he didn't carry it alone. Kael awoke to a low hum shaking the walls of his chamber. The sky outside had changed color. It no longer shone blue, but deep crimson. A storm of unknown origin brewed in the distance. He stood at the window and watched the strange clouds swirl. The artifact pulsed on his chest with steady light. It didn't feel like a warning, it felt like a signal. Something had entered the system, something ancient. Kael turned to Aranthia, who was already strapping on her armor in silence. "The Voidkin have found us," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands moved quickly. "They've hunted the artifact across galaxies. Now they know it's awakened again. And they won't stop until it's taken or destroyed." Kael felt the weight of her words. He had trained with the Lorekeeper and studied ancient history. He had read about the Voidkin, a faction lost to time who worshipped nothingness. Their goal was simple: erase all meaning, erase all bonds. He followed Aranthia to the Spire's war chamber. Dozens of commanders stood before a map filled with red indicators. Ships were moving toward their world, some from wormholes, some cloaked in stealth. They had surrounded the outer moons. "The artifact's pulse exposed us," one commander said. "Its energy cannot be hidden anymore." The Voidkin felt the wave through space. "They are coming for the bearer and the bride." Kael clenched his fists. He wasn't ready for a war. But the artifact pulsed again, stronger than before. He realized something important. It didn't want to be hidden. It wanted to be used. Not as a weapon, but as a guide. "We stand and fight," Aranthia said. "But not with force alone. The artifact must be anchored. Kael must connect with it completely. Only then can we resist the darkness it draws." They entered the heart room, a deep chamber beneath the spire. It was carved into living crystal. The air shimmered with ancient code and whispering light. In the center floated a silver platform. Kael stepped onto it without hesitation. The moment he stood on the platform, light wrapped around his body. The walls lit up with thousands of symbols. The air grew still. Then a voice spoke from the crystal, a voice older than language, clear in his mind like thunder and water. "You are the first of Earth. The bond is now final. Speak your truth. Command your heart. If you falter, the bond ends here." Kael closed his eyes. He thought of his old life, of silence and loneliness, of questions he never had answers to. But now he had purpose. He opened his mouth and spoke. 5 words that echoed beyond the chamber walls. "I accept the bond completely." A surge of energy lifted him into the air. The artifact on his chest glowed like a miniature sun. Aranthia stepped back as waves of light filled the chamber. Kael's feet never touched the floor again until the platform dimmed beneath him. When he landed, the symbol on his skin had changed. It now carried a second ring, Aranthia's ring. They were no longer linked by force. They were now joined by will. The artifact had approved the connection fully. Above them, alarms began to scream. The Voidkin had entered orbit. Their ships were long and dark, like blades carved from night. They didn't fire missiles. They dropped something worse. Living machines rained from their hulls toward the planet's surface. Tia turned to Kael. "You don't need to fight them. You just need to reach the beacon. The artifact will guide the way. I'll hold them off until you light it." Kael hesitated for only a second before he ran. The beacon was hidden in the forest valley of Siluran, far from the cities. It had not been used in centuries, but it was said to awaken only for a true bearer. As Kael entered the hover transport and sped into the wind, the artifact beat against his chest like a second heart. He didn't feel fear anymore, only focus. The galaxy had trusted him. Now he had to answer. The forest of Siluran stretched endlessly beneath the transport. Thick clouds of violet mist drifted between the trees. Light from the artifact glowed through Kael's shirt as he guided the ship low over the canopy. He could feel the beacon calling to him, He wasn't sure how he would activate it. There were no instructions, no buttons, only instinct and trust. The beacon was older than memory and locked by a bond no machine could break. Only the bearer could wake it. Kael landed on a flat ridge beside a ring of stone pillars. The air felt heavy with silence. The trees didn't move. Even the wind seemed afraid. As he stepped out, the artifact grew brighter, reacting to something. Beneath the ground, he placed his hand on one of the pillars. Symbols appeared instantly, glowing with the same color as his chest. The stones shifted with deep rumbling sounds, and the earth opened to reveal stairs carved in silver. Kael descended without fear, every step lit beneath his feet. The tunnel grew warmer the deeper he went. The silence was not empty. It was full of attention. Like something ancient had just noticed him and was waiting. The tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber. A crystal monolith floated in the center, spinning slowly. It looked like a shard of starlight frozen in motion. Kael knew this was the beacon. But he wasn't alone. Shadows moved near the edges of the room. Voidkin. Their armor looked like broken stone, and their faces were hidden behind dark masks. They had arrived before him, but had not dared to touch the monolith. They were waiting for him to make the mistake. Kael stepped forward calmly. The artifact pulsed harder. The Voidkin hissed in their own language but did not attack. One stepped into the light, taller than the others, wearing a black crown. He raised one clawed hand and pointed. "Bearer, you do not understand what you carry. That beacon ends everything. Light spreads rot. Let us take the burden and return silence to the stars." Kael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He placed his hand on the beacon's surface. It was cold at first, then it turned warm. Then it turned alive. Light poured through his body, through the room, through the stone. The Voidkin screamed and fell back. Some collapsed. Some fled. The one with the crown held his ground. His body shook as the light spread over him. Cracks formed in his armor, revealing nothing underneath but smoke. "You have doomed us," the crowned one said. "The cycle begins again. You think light saves, but it burns. It always burns." Kael's eyes stayed fixed on the monolith. The artifact on his chest fused with the beacon's glow. The entire chamber began to rise. Walls of energy climbed around them. Outside, the sky answered with thunder and gold. From orbit, ships watched as a pillar of pure light broke through the forest and stabbed into the clouds. Across the planet, the pulse echoed. Machines stopped. The Voidkin fleet froze in place. The artifact had declared the world protected. Aranthia stood on a tower watching the beam. Her face was lit by its glow. Her soldiers stared in awe. "He reached it," she whispered. He actually reached it. The monolith lowered Kael gently to the floor. The beacon had accepted him. The bond was now complete in both mind and place. Kael stood taller. His eyes shimmered with a trace of starlight. He was no longer just a bearer. He was the voice of the artifact. The crowned Voidkin staggered back. He didn't attack. He bowed his head and vanished into black mist. The others followed. The chamber fell still once more. But it wasn't empty. It was now alive with power. Kael walked out of the beacon chamber alone. The artifact still pulsed, but it no longer felt heavy. He knew now what it meant to carry its legacy. Not just to protect, but to awaken what had been forgotten. The sky cleared as he stepped into the sunlight. Birds returned to the trees. The mist rolled away like it had been afraid. And far above, Aranthia was already coming to meet him. Kael stepped into the waiting shuttle as Aranthia reached out to pull him aboard. The hatch sealed behind them, and the sound of engines filled the space. Light from the beacon was still visible even from the upper atmosphere. Neither of them spoke. Right away, his clothes were torn and stained with dust. The symbol on his chest had changed again. It now had 3 rings, one for the bearer, one for the bride, and one for the world that had accepted them. It pulsed with quiet strength. Arinthia helped him sit and touched his arm gently. "You activated it," she said. "The galaxy. Felt it. You've done what no one else has done in thousands of years. You brought the beacon back to life." Kael leaned back in the seat and stared at the ceiling. He felt older. He felt like the boy from Earth had vanished. The man who remained now carried the will of something far greater. But he wasn't afraid. The shuttle landed on the spire's highest platform. The sky was clearer than it had been. In weeks, birds flew again. Waterfalls that had stopped now flowed with crystal blue streams. The energy from the beacon was healing everything. The council waited inside. Their faces showed shock and something close to fear. For them, the beacon was only a legend. No one had truly believed it would rise again. And now Kael stood before them with proof glowing from his chest. "You are not just the bearer anymore," one of the counselors said. "You are a symbol. Every world will look to you now, some with hope, others with envy. The balance will shift." Kael didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to understand what it meant. Why him? Why now? But the answers weren't given. Only time would explain what the artifact truly planned. He only knew he had to walk the path laid before him. Arinthia stood beside him, proud and calm. Her people whispered her name with new reverence. She had not just bonded with the bearer, she had defended the old truth when others wanted to forget it. She had become more than a princess. She had become legend. That night, fires were lit across the cities in celebration. Dancers filled the squares. Songs were sung in dozens of alien tongues. Kael sat quietly in a small garden with Arinthia. Far from the noise, watching lights rise into the sky. "I saw what the beacon showed me," he said. "I saw stars falling, civilizations ending. But I also saw peace, real peace. Do you think it's possible?" "After everything we've seen." Arinthia didn't answer immediately. She reached over and held his hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "Peace is never given," she said. "It's grown. And now we have a seed." The stars above them blinked slowly. Some seemed closer now, as if other civilizations had already begun to react. Some would send envoys. Some would send threats. But all would notice that the artifact had chosen again. The Voidkin had not returned. For now, they had vanished. But Kael could feel them like dust on the wind, watching, waiting. They hadn't been destroyed, only delayed. They feared the beacon. And that meant they would plan for its undoing. He wasn't afraid of them, not anymore. Because he understood something they didn't. The artifact didn't just respond to force. It responded to unity. It responded to those who were willing to carry its weight for others, not for control. Later that evening, Kael walked through the halls of the spire alone. Every being that passed bowed or nodded. It felt strange. He was still human. Still the same man who once lived in silence near the ocean. But now he walked with stars at his back. He paused near a window and looked out across the world he had helped protect. Light flowed across the horizon like a river of energy. This was no longer just Arinthia's home. It was now part of his story too. Across the galaxy, Kael's name began to echo in council chambers and command halls. The activation of the beacon had sent a pulse that reached star systems untouched by war for centuries. Some cheered, some prepared their weapons. All paid attention. The message was clear. The artifact had returned. It had chosen not one of the ancient bloodlines or trained scholars, but a human from a forgotten world. Kael had broken every pattern the old factions trusted. And that terrified them. On the distant world of Zoran Prime, a high warlord shattered his throne in anger. He had spent years preparing to reclaim the beacon for his house. Now it belonged to an outsider. He ordered his ships to mobilize and sent spies into neutral space, in another part of the galaxy, On the moon temples of Velara, the priesthood danced in golden circles. They believed the new bearer was the sign of a prophecy. They sent gifts across the stars, praying to be the first to earn Kael's favor. Aranthea stood beside Kael as the spire's envoys brought reports from all corners of space. Some ships were coming in peace. Others flew with fire hidden behind. Words. The galaxy was waking up faster than anyone expected. We have stirred giants, Aranthea said, and ghosts. Some of them do not remember how to speak without swords. You will need to show them a different language. One they cannot. Silence with fear. Kael nodded. He was not a politician. But he had something better. He had the truth. The artifact was never meant for rulers or warriors. It was meant for those willing to carry others. It responded not to dominance but to sacrifice. The first delegation arrived 3 days later. They came in a crystal sphere, crewed by beings who looked like walking smoke with stars in their chests. They bowed without words and offered Kael a stone that hummed in his hand. The second delegation came armed. Their leader demanded the artifact be turned over. He claimed ancient law gave it to his people. Kael didn't argue. He let the artifact speak. The glow from his chest flared, and the visitors fell silent, humbled by truth. Aranthea watched it all unfold with pride. She saw in Kael what her ancestors had failed to see in their own kind. He didn't seek power. He carried responsibility. And that made him impossible to predict. Late one night, Kael sat on a balcony overlooking the sky. Stars drifted like slow sparks. The weight of attention grew heavier each day. Aranthea sat beside him, her presence quiet and steady. She didn't need to speak for him to feel her strength. I was never meant to lead anything, Kael said. But I was also never meant to be invisible. Maybe that's why the artifact picked me. Because I never chased the light. I just didn't. Turn from it when it called. She placed her hand on his and nodded. That's all it asks. Not greatness, just presence. The courage to stand where others kneel. And the heart to keep standing when the world watches. Suddenly, the sky above lit up. A rift opened near the edge of the system. Not a ship, not a gate. Something old and slow. A force that didn't rush but pressed. It was not here in peace. Kael stood, his body already pulsing with energy. The artifact flared brighter than before. Aranthea's hand gripped his arm. The beacon in the distance began to shimmer. A new presence had entered the stage. The Voidkin were returning. But this time, they didn't come as hunters. They came with chains forged not of metal, but of memory. They meant to use Kael's past against him. To show him pain until he bent. Kael didn't flinch. He looked into the distance and whispered a promise to no one but himself. I will not break, not now. Not when they finally see what we are made of. The rift widened above the spire, swirling with violet-black energy. It pulsed with unnatural rhythm, sending waves of pressure across the atmosphere. The air grew heavy. The ground trembled under. The weight of something old awakening from slumber. From within the rift emerged a colossal structure. It wasn't a ship in the traditional sense. It looked like a temple made of bone and void, carried on the backs of forgotten creatures. At its center floated the crowned Voidkin Kael had once faced. Aranthea stood beside Kael on the spire's upper platform. Her armor shimmered under the beacon's light. Around them, defensive forces prepared but did not act. They waited for the bearer. Only he could decide what this final challenge would become. Kael didn't move in fear. He walked forward until the artifact burned white on his chest. He could feel the pain inside the approaching presence. It wasn't just rage. It was loss. The Voidkin had once been protectors before they chose silence over light. A message rang from the temple above. It was not words but memory. Kael was flooded with visions. Worlds consumed by war. Bonds broken. Bearers who failed. The Voidkin had witnessed too much. They now believed only emptiness could protect what remained. They want you to surrender. Orinthia said, not out of weakness, out of pity. They think if you fall, the cycle can end. They don't understand. It's not the artifact they fear. It's hope. Kael nodded. He closed his eyes and stepped into the center of the spire's circle. The beacon responded instantly. A pillar of golden light rose around him, piercing the clouds. It was not a weapon. It was a mirror. It showed truth. The temple above slowed its approach. The voidkin inside screamed without sound. Their bodies cracked as memories poured from the beacon. They saw themselves not as monsters, but as what they once were. Guardians who forgot why they stood guard. Kael raised his voice and spoke to them through the light. I see you. I do not erase you. But I will not follow you. The artifact chose me not to bury the past, but to plant the future. The crown shattered from the voidkin leader's head. He fell to his knees within his own vessel. Around him, the others collapsed in silence. They were not defeated. They were freed. The artifact had lifted their burden without battle. The rift began to close. The dark temple folded in on itself. No explosion, no cries. Just a breath taken after holding it for too long. The sky cleared, and stars returned to their rightful places. The final challenge had ended without war. Kael dropped to his knees. His strength had not broken, but the weight of peace was heavier than violence. Orinthia rushed to his side and lifted him into her arms. The artifact dimmed gently, now resting quietly against his chest. The council declared the cycle reborn. But this time, there would be no throne. No empire. The artifact's bearer would walk among the people, not above them. Kael accepted, not because he wanted it, but because he believed it was right. Years passed. Kael and Orinthia became names spoken in schools and across stars. They traveled to worlds forgotten by time. Some they helped rebuild, some they simply listened to. The artifact never glowed brighter than it did in their quietest moments. A new age rose. One not ruled by fleets or crowns, but by choice. The galaxy did not forget its pain, but it no longer bowed to it. It remembered how to breathe, how to hope, how to begin again. One evening, in a garden surrounded by twin suns, Kael stood beside Orinthia watching the sky. Their hands were clasped. Their faces carried time, but their eyes still held fire. They had never ruled. They had only walked. And that had been enough. The artifact glowed one last time. Then it faded into their skin, not as a tool, but as a memory. The galaxy no longer needed a bearer. It had learned to carry itself. And Kael, the human who had once been alone, had become a story the stars would never forget.